Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Michael Kushner, host of HOA Hell. With me, as always, is Senior Associate from MBK Chapman, Sam Kill. Sam, good morning.
Morning, Mike. Glad to be with you.
Glad you're here. Sam, today we're going to talk about a specific kind of committee, but in so doing, we'll kind of talk loosely about committees in general and the authority to form committees. But we're going to talk today about architectural committees. Now, we have on our website, there is at least one fact sheet on committees, and there's at least one fact sheet on, or there's several fact sheets on architectural guidelines, how plans are approved. That's not what we're going to talk about today in this episode. We aren't going to talk about submission of plans, the steps that are taken to get them approved or not approved. That's not what today's episode's for. Today's episode is to literally talk about architectural committees and their function in the architectural process, an architectural review process.
Right.
Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today, okay? Now, a lot of homeowners assume that an architectural committee, denies projects or hears projects and that's the end of the story. Well, that's not true. There's a whole bunch of things that have to happen before you can have an architectural committee. But once they're formed, HOAs that have them, they tend to do the same things, even though they might have different names, and we'll get into that, okay? So today, we're going to walk through, very basic, we're going to walk through what an architectural committee is, okay? Where their authority comes from, what they can and can't do under the law. Doesn't stop bad HOAs from trying to go further, but we're going to at least give you the law on that. And then what rights homeowners have if a committee denies an application. So again, we're focusing not on the board denying your plans. If your HOA doesn't have an architectural committee and it's the board deciding, we're not talking about that process today. We're talking about committees only. So in this context, if a committee looks at your plans and denies your plans, what are your rights? That's what we're going to cover today, okay? My hope basically is by the end of this episode, our listeners are going to understand that a lot of HOA boards don't understand the purpose of the architectural committee very well. They don't have...
It's a source of frequent confusion. I've seen it on the other side with the HOAs. Sometimes even their attorneys having to kind of backpedal and kind of cover for them. Yeah.
And basically, architectural committees are not ultimate authority on the decision about your application. The board is, always. And there is one exception, and we're going to get to that later, but that's basically if the architectural committee is made up only of board members, well then, in a way, it's kind of the same thing. But we're going to talk about that, okay? And we're going to talk specifically, when we get to that section, we're going to talk about this kind of a loophole in the law, in the Davis-Sterling Act, which is, it works against homeowner rights. And we're going to talk about how bad HOAs exploit that loophole. But once you're able to recognize it, and if you can make a record of that, it'll go a long way toward helping you. If you ever end up in court, it'll be very helpful to you to have this information. So we'll make sure we get to that. So let's start with at its basis. What is an architectural committee? What does that mean when we use those words? Okay? Tell me what an architectural committee is.
Well, it's essentially a committee or a subset operating either in conjunction with a board or under the board that reviews, applications submitted by homeowners regarding additions, modifications, sometimes landscaping, pertaining to, homeowners trying to, supplement their properties. And they review it. And
they make a decision.
Make a decision, essentially,
right. Okay. So it's a committee. It's not the board sitting as a board and voting and making a decision. It is a committee that is chosen by the board. We've talked in general in several other episodes. We've talked in general about how committees serve at the behest of the board. In other words, the members of the committee are selected by the board. They're not voted. There is an exception. We'll talk about it. There is an exception, but it's very rare. So when I'm speaking now, I'm speaking pretty much the 99% of the cases. The committee members are appointed by the board, and they can be terminated, if that's a word. They can be terminated at the behest of the board, at their discretion. They are not subject to a vote by the membership, except in one specific case, which we'll get to, okay? Now, your HOA might have a committee that sounds very similar to it, but it might be known by different words. when we use the term architectural committee today, or architectural review committee, I might call it an ARC, but it could be a bunch of other names. Give me a couple more.
Design review committee,
right,
is one.
Architectural review committee, architectural design committee, design review committee, architectural control committee.
That's a big one, yeah.
Yeah, any of those, they all mean architectural committee, or as we're going to say today, architectural review committee, or ARC. Those are all the same thing.
Yeah.
So yours might have it under a different designation, but that's what it means, okay? In practice, there's no difference, okay? An architectural committee, if you're going to remember nothing else about part one here, is an architectural committee exists for one reason only, and that's to review architectural applications and administer approval or denial as required by the law and the governing documents.
Exactly.
That's it. That is their sole function. They do nothing else. There's no discipline. They're not the ones that hear discipline about violations of architectural guidelines. That's not up to the architectural committee. That's a board thing, okay? They have that one function. They get applications, they look at them, they look at the law, they look at the governing documents, and they decide whether or not they're going to say yes or no. That's it. That's it, that's it, that's it, okay? Regardless of what your HOA might call that committee, all the different names we said, it's governed by 4765 of the Civil Code, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
So, example, homeowner submits plans to build a patio. That HOA happens to have an architectural review committee, an ARC, okay? That committee's going to, true or false, committee's going to receive the plans and take a look at them.
True, absolutely.
Committee might turn them over to the architect or an architect for the HOA that's retained as a professional to look at those plans as well, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Advise on adequacy, any issues, setbacks, whatever.
Right. And the committee will then vote as a committee on whether or not to approve or deny, right?
It should be, yes.
And then they'll put together a written finding, because we talked about 4765, the Civil Code does require that. And they will submit that to the homeowner that submitted the plan. And then that's it. That's it. They're done. That's their job. Everything that happens after that is between the homeowner and somebody else, the board, management, somebody else. Okay?
Let me just add, that's a preferred handling, or what they're supposed to be.
Well, that's what the law says. It's supposed to be. You're right. Thank you for clarifying. All right. So now we've kind of defined what an architectural committee is. That's pretty easy. Now, why is it that some HOAs have them and some don't? Well, let's talk about the obvious thing. In most HOAs, they are not required.
Correct.
They are required in some. And you'll know whether or not your HOA is required to have an architectural committee by looking at your governing documents. So that could be your CC&Rs, it could be your bylaws, it could be your rules and regulations or your architectural guidelines. Something that is one of your governing documents will say, let's say your HOA is the ABC HOA. ABC HOA must have at all times a sitting architectural committee or a sitting architectural control committee, whatever it is. Right. That's the only time it is required, is when the governing documents, one of those governing documents or more, say it is required. Now, that's rare. It's very, very, very infrequent where it will be. So you're almost never going to see that. But let's assume that that's not the case, that it's not required. Why do some have them and some don't? Well, I think one of the big ones is size. Okay? Give me what am I talking about when I talk about size?
Well, size usually the sheer volume of requests you receive in terms of the board side receiving them from the membership is a function of the size of the community. So, for instance, in a smaller community, let's just say 20 homes and condominium.
Small condo complex with 20 condos.
20 units, 20 homes. They simply will not submit that many applications. So in those cases,
most it'd be 20, right?
In those cases, oftentimes they will not have a separate committee reviewing these. They will be reviewed by the board as they come.
Yeah, you got 20 homes. Chance of you ever being inundated with applications is going to be slim and none. Yeah. And so the board's not going to waste time or effort forming a committee. They're just going to hear it.
And conversely, if you have a community of 500 homes plus,
or more, or even 100 100.
And
or more.
You need the additional layers to assist the board and to also have perhaps an architect take a look at it.
In other words, in situations in HOAs where an architectural committee is not required, and the board is authorized to form committees, and that's something we'll talk about later, then they might decide based on how big they are and how many submissions. The board might say, we need help. We're going to have a committee kind of handle these, and then we'll take care of the hard ones, sort of thing. Okay, and that's perfectly acceptable. But that's why some do and some don't. It doesn't get more complicated than that. Now, there are 3 scenarios regarding committees. We talked about one. All right, we said
it's required.
Right. Where it is specifically set forth in the governing documents that there must at all times be an architectural committee. So it must have it. You got to follow the governing documents. It's required. On the more common situation and the most common situation, I'll leave for a second, and then we'll go to another very infrequent situation, and that's when the governing documents either do not authorize the HOA to form any committees at all, or even something more rare, there's an explicit prohibition, which I don't think I've ever seen.
I haven't seen it either.
But it is a possibility. But there could be a specific prohibition that there may be committees, but not this kind. Okay? That almost never happens. We both said in our combined almost 30 years and whatever he's got, well over.
My sense is it would
never
not
seen
be
it.
A prohibition per se, but it would be worded in a manner that it shall not be delegated to any other body other than the board itself.
Right. Either way, if it had language like that, if your governing documents have language that basically instruct the board that they can't have an architectural committee, whatever that language is, then that's it. Now, so you must have it or you can never have it, or other rare cases. The vast majority of the cases, usually CC&Rs, but governing documents can do it in general, grant boards authority to form as many committees as they feel necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the HOA. And among those could be an architectural committee. And so if the governing documents give authority to the board to form committees, then you'll often see architecture committees formed in neighborhoods that tend to be larger, and you'll see less of them in neighborhoods that tend to be smaller, just like Sam's example of the 20 condos. It's that simple, okay? So, key point is an architecture committee will exist only if the governing documents authorize the existence or mandate the existence.
Correct.
That's it. Okay? Very simple. Okay? So, if your HOA has a committee and you want to find out whether or not it's even legally allowed to have it, you know what to look for. Look for something that says that no committees are allowed, or look for something that says that no architectural committees are allowed. If you don't find either of those, then your HOA is allowed to have one. It's that simple. Okay? Now, did we leave anything out, or have we covered that? I think we covered that.
I think we covered it all, yeah.
We beat that. Okay. Yep. So now let's talk about when an architectural committee meeting becomes a board meeting. And this is where we see, should I say the most, or among the most kinds of abuse by bad HOAs?
Well, it's certainly voluminous. We see it all the time. Yeah.
This is one of the more common areas of HOA abuse.
It's
related
commonly misunderstood.
This is one of the areas that we see the most common abuse by a bad HOA when it comes to architectural committees, is when an architectural committee meeting is an open board meeting. Okay, but they're not calling it that, and they aren't treating it that, and that's what we're going to talk about now, because that's something you need to pay attention to. Okay. Architectural committees do not always operate independently of the board, okay? In some situations, a committee meeting is legally treated the same as a board meeting under California law. In those cases where it is supposed to be treated like an open board meeting under California law, it has to be treated like an open board meeting. Now, I'm going to put in our description, I'm going to put a link to an episode that we did on the Open Meeting Act, because that's going to be important in this conversation. And I know we did at least one episode on that. So go and look for that, okay? And this issue is a function of who is on that committee.
Exactly.
Okay? The number of directors present at a committee meeting, by the way, number of directors present at a committee meeting is not the important factor. It's who's on the committee, who's voting, who's making the decisions, who's participating in the discussion about a particular application. That's what matters, okay? So if a committee, and I'm going to let you do the next one, okay? If a committee, I'm going to ask you this and you answer. How about that?
Go for it, yeah.
Let's take a committee. Let's say that your board has 5 members, okay? Your HOA, your board has 5 members. Your HOA mandates a board of directors consisting of 5 directors, okay? And your board's or your HOA's architectural committee has 2 members on it, 2 members of the board, and let's say 3 other members. So let's say it's 5 and 5, coincidence, okay? So there's 2 directors sitting on that architectural committee and 3 members at large or 3 non-board members.
Okay.
Is that committee, and don't tell me why, just tell me yes or no, is that committee considered should that committee be considered, let me rephrase, should that committee meeting be considered an open meeting of the board?
No.
No. Okay. And why not?
The short explanation for that is because you don't have a quorum of the board members present or comprising that committee. Meaning, if you have a 5-person board, under your scenario, you would need at least 3 directors to be members of that committee for that to constitute quorum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have talked about quorum in multiple episodes. I can't point to a specific one, although we might have one. I don't know, so I won't put a link to one. But I know that I've covered it in multiple fact sheets on the website. But a quorum, basically, for lack of a better definition and for a shortcut definition, and I won't go into any exceptions today, it's not what this episode's about, is a majority of the directors on the board. If your board has 5, a majority is 3. If your board has 7, a majority is 5. That's it. That's just, if you want a quick definition for quorum, there you go. So under Sam's rule here, if an architecture committee consists of fewer directors than would make up a quorum of the board, it's not to be treated as, it's not required to be treated like an open meeting of the board.
Correct.
Now, the flip side then would have to be treated, and that would be, let's say in this scenario, and I'll answer this, in this scenario, let's say we have 5 members of an architectural committee. We have 5 board members on the HOA's board, and 3 of those board members sit on the architectural committee, meaning that 2 non-board members take up the last 2 places. So if I were to ask, would that require treating their architectural committee meetings as open board meetings? The answer is yes, because for the reason Sam said, there is at least a quorum of directors sitting on that committee, participating in that discussion and voting on that application. You now have a quorum of the directors. So that is the action of the board, because a quorum speaks for the board. So now that is subject to the Open Meeting Act, which we'll get to in a minute. Why are we discussing this? Because it means something.
Yeah. Get
to that in a minute. Now let's go to the other scenario. And I'll let Sam answer this. Sam, you have a architectural committee consisting of 5 committee members. All of them are board members. In fact, the board, for whatever reason, formed, let's say I'll give you this scenario that would be more realistic. Let's say there's 7 board members for this HOA, but there's 5 committee members. And 5 of all of the seats on the committee are made up of directors. So maybe I reverse that, right?
So you're saying 5 and 5?
No, 7 and 5.
Okay.
7 board members,
Yeah.
5 committee members. All 5 committee members are board members, meaning
Understood.
5 of the 7 are sitting on.
Understood. Yeah.
Should that committee, all the committee meetings, be treated under the Open Meeting Act as board meetings?
100%.
100%.
Quorum requirements met, like scenario 2 that
Exactly.
you just discussed.
Yep.
And that's essentially going to be deemed to be analogous or tantamount to a board
Right.
meeting.
And it doesn't matter if, and it wouldn't be the case in this last example, but in the first 2 examples it doesn't matter if there are non-board members sitting on the committee. All that matters in that analysis is whether or not there's enough board members sitting on the committee to constitute a quorum of the board.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. Now, why does that matter? Why does that matter? Well, Open Meeting Act, okay? So, Open Meeting Act is part of the Davis-Sterling Act, controls HOAs in California, residential HOAs in California. And the whole purpose of the Open Meeting Act, is you'll get from that episode that we did that I linked to earlier in this episode, the whole point of that is to make sure that there's maximum transparency and make sure that homeowners have a right to know what's going on in their community. Most homeowners that live in HOAs in California are aware that there are regular meetings of the board that people are allowed to attend, whether personally or by Zoom or whatever, but they know you're allowed to attend. And a lot of people even know there's usually a forum at the beginning for homeowners to speak their mind. Those are board meetings. And the reason homeowners are allowed to be there is because part of the Open Meeting Act establishes the rule that says that homeowners can attend all open board meetings. We say open board meetings to differentiate those from executive session board meetings where homeowners are not entitled to be present. But part of the Open Meeting Act says at open board meetings, members are allowed to attend and listen. They don't get to vote. They don't get to participate except for the limited time open for homeowner forum, right? But they are there to monitor, to listen. They can take notes. And that's the openness that's required, that kind of transparency, so they can see their board making decisions and voting on decisions. Now, give me a couple other things that are part of the Open Meeting Act that would have to be met
absolutely,
with a committee.
So some of those requirements or prerequisites as part of the Open Meeting Act and in fostering transparency is to provide adequate notice prior to that meeting, to circulate or post an agenda of what items are to be discussed at this meeting. And that really apprises the membership, or supposed to at least, of what's being covered, what's being addressed, so that they can meaningfully participate.
As we discussed in our episode on the Open Meeting Act, the agenda is critically important, not only because it's required, and it's required to be posted or provided to the homeowners in the manner set forth in their governing documents, or if absent that, in the default provisions of the Davis-Sterling Act. But it's nothing that, unless it meets an emergency exception, you can't, at an open meeting of the board, they cannot make decisions that on issues that weren't agendized. Okay? Again, there's emergency exceptions to that.
Right.
But other than that, if a topic wasn't on the agenda that was posted and supplied a certain period of time prior to the meeting, the board can't act on that. They can discuss it, but they can't make decisions and vote.
Right.
Okay? So the agenda is important, but there's one other aspect, and it's something that comes during the meeting and then is published after, and that is required minutes. All open meetings of the board and the membership, all open meetings require minutes. Okay? If your architectural committee consists of all board members or a quorum of board members, and the Open Meeting Act therefore applies, then the rules governing open board meetings govern architectural committee meetings, meaning homeowners have a right to be present during those meetings. Homeowners have a right to receive notice of those architectural meetings. Homeowners have a right to receive and read the minutes that are supposed to be kept at those architectural meetings. But if your architectural committee does not consist of a quorum of directors or any directors, then there is no requirement for an ahead of time notice. There's no requirement for an agenda to be provided in advance. There's no requirement that they limit what they discussed to things that are on that non-existent agenda. There's no requirement to permit homeowners to attend those meetings and listen in, and there's no requirement to take any minutes. It all depends on whether or not the Open Meeting Act applies. And the Open Meeting Act will only apply if there's a quorum or more of the members of the committee being directors. That's it.
Yep.
And in those cases, if you know let's say you know that the committee consists of 5 people, 3 of which are directors, and you're never seeing notice of those architectural control minutes, or I'm sorry, you're never seeing those architectural committee notices. You're never seeing an agenda posted. You've asked for it and they say it doesn't exist, and you've certainly never seen one posted or published onto the website or whatever the case is in your HOA. There are no minutes, or they won't share them with you, or you've never seen them. Or they won't let you attend, even if you found out when one was. They don't let you in. They are violating the law. Agreed?
Agreed. And just one addition, not to be too academic, but in theory, and this is one of those scenarios that we probably have never seen or rarely seen, if your governing documents provide for that compulsory notice or for things to be held in an open fashion, even though not required by the Civil Code, right, or the Open Meetings Act, because you don't have the quorum. Theoretically, your governing documents can impose that added layer.
I've never seen that.
I haven't seen it either, but in theory, that could exist for communities that want to foster more transparency.
Right. Yeah. So he's bringing up a nuance that, in practical terms, neither of us have ever actually seen. Right. It could exist. We've said it.
If they really wanted to accomplish it, they could get it done.
Sure, no problem. Basically, the way that your HOA classifies that meeting as a architectural meeting or a board meeting is irrelevant. All that matters is who's there and who's present, right? The labels are relevant. If the committee is made up of a quorum or more, then for all intents and purposes, it's an open board meeting, and the Open Meeting Act applies. It's that simple, okay? Now, I want to make sure we do cover at least one aspect of, okay, so now we've established the existence of this architectural committee. Regardless of whether or not it consists of a quorum of directors or more, they take an application in, they talk about it, they consider it. I do want to say at least once, even though this isn't the episode where we discussed the actual workings of what happens at an architectural committee, I want to say it now, and that is basically 4765 imposes an obligation on the members of this committee, in this case, to take into account the governing documents and the law in determining whether or not to allow or disallow whatever is at issue.
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is because the decision that this committee makes it's mandatory that it be grounded in the governing documents and not on whatever whims or desires or generic general views of aesthetics they might have.
In other words, standards that are actually articulated in those governing documents, including any guidelines they have.
And objective.
Yeah, exactly.
Objectively articulated.
Not something arbitrary. And
right. Capricious and all that. Okay. We've said it. All right. Now, let's talk about what happens after an architectural control committee, an ARC, denies an application. Okay? That happens all the time. And that, by the way, is another major area of conflict between members and HOAs is when plans are submitted and the HOA says, no. That creates a lot of problems for obvious reasons, okay? So in cases where your HOA has a committee, an architectural committee, and that committee is not made up of a quorum or more of directors. That is, there are more members at large who are not on the board sitting on that committee. If that committee denies your application, what right do homeowners have right off the bat?
The right to appeal to the committee.
To who?
To the committee.
To the committee or to the...
Oh, pardon me. If the committee is not comprised of the quorum of the board members, then to the board itself.
Right. In my scenario, this committee does not consist
it does not, in that scenario.
Of a quorum. So, committee says no to your plans. You have an absolute statutory right to say, well, I don't agree with that. I want the whole board to hear my arguments now. I want them to look at my application. I want to be heard, and then I want them to make a decision. Now, Sam, let's say that happens. You go to the board. A good HOA will acknowledge your right to do that, and they set some meaning to do that, okay? Can they say, you know what, homeowner, you're right. We're overruling the committee. Your application is granted. Can they do that?
Of course.
Yeah. The board always has the right.
Ultimate authority, yeah.
Always. Let's make it even easier. Let's say you don't even have an architectural committee. Let's say your board denies your application and then you ask to be heard again and they set another meeting and they listen to you again. They can override themselves. The board has the right to change its mind. But in our scenarios, we're working with the existence of an architectural committee. And in my scenario here, that committee consists of members and less than a quorum of board members. So there might be one board member on the committee. Whatever it is, they deny your application. You appeal it to the larger board, to the board as a whole, and the board says, you know what, you're right. We're overruling. Absolute right to do that. Committee cannot step in and go, wait a minute, we've made a decision. and our decision is final. No, it's not. The board can overrule them anytime they want. Okay? That's easy peasy. You'll find that in 4765 Civil Code.
And by the way, good HOA documents contain an appeal provision too that make it very clear, abundantly clear, that they can appeal to the board.
Right. They will notify, they will tell the homeowners, you have a right to, you've now been rejected, you have a right to. It'll be part of a form letter on the rejection. You now have a right, if you wish, to appeal to the board as a whole. If you'd like to do that, send an email to blank or call this number or do whatever. Good HOAs have that in writing. They notify you of that, and they tell you how to facilitate that. And that's true, okay? Now, so that's the easy case, right? Committee doesn't consist of majority of board members, and they deny. You can appeal to the board, and the board as a whole must hear it, and then they can decide either we agree with the architectural committee or they can say we overrule. Board has complete discretion. Is it different if the architectural committee, though, consists of a quorum or more of directors? Is it different?
It is. It is. In those cases, you can submit it if there's a denial by a committee that's constituted or comprised largely of board members, meeting quorum requirements. They will be treated tantamount to a board subject to the Open Meeting Act, as we discussed, and any essentially appeal process would be a reconsideration submitted to them directly.
Now, in other words, it'd be a reconsideration. A board that has an architectural committee that consists of a quorum or more of directors, you do not have an automatic right to appeal to the board as a whole because that is a board decision. But you can ask, and they can always grant it. There's no rule saying in those cases where a quorum or more make up the members of the committee, no appeal is possible. They just say you don't have a right to it. Remember, in the other scenario, when it was less than a quorum, just members at large or the committee, you have an absolute right to appeal to the entire board. Okay? In this case, you don't have that right, but that doesn't mean that they can't say, look, there's three of us, 3 of the 5 members of the board are on this committee, but if you want all 5 board members, including us 3, to hear it, and we'll get to that in a second, whether that's fair, but if you want us, we don't have a problem with that. They can do that, but you don't have a right to it. Now let's get to what I just hinted at, because that's important. This is where you see bad HOAs and good HOAs, and you see a bright line, because bad HOAs will purposely blur the distinction between a committee decision and a board decision. Let me give you a fact pattern that would fit here, okay? You have a board that consists of 5 directors. You have a committee, architectural committee, that consists of 5 committee members. 3 of the committee members are members of the board. You now have a quorum, okay? They deny your application. You say, all right, I recognize I'm not entitled to an appeal because this was a decision of the board, but I want one. And they say, yeah, no problem. You can have one. Does it rub you the wrong way if those 3 board members who now go back to the board meeting, if they join in the discussion of that appeal? Does that seem wonky to you?
It does. I mean, arguably, you're being re-reviewed, right, or reconsidered by the same individuals who initially denied you. So there's a problem with that. However,
it's kind of a conflict of interest a little bit. It feels conflicty.
The flip side to that is if it's a 5-person board and you already have the quorum, so 3 members on there, and you recuse
There's your
them,
majority.
then you have 2 essentially non-conflicted or non-involved board members.
Right. Yeah. The law is, see, that seems wonky to people, but the law there is there's no problem there. That's not going to create an illegal problem. It's kind of just a reality. It seems unfair, but it's really not, because those 3 members, they are already a quorum, so the decision is going to go their way anyway, and what you're left with is 2 people. And even if they somehow sat out, which it wouldn't be required in that case, you'd have 2 people making your decision. Okay? And it's
not going to work.
That's not going to work.
Yeah.
Okay? So here's the situation where what you see with bad and good HOAs. Here's where you do see it. You have a 5-person board. You have a 5-member committee. Okay? 2 of the board members are on the committee. It is not a quorum. A majority of the committee are made of non-board members. They deny your application. You have, as a homeowner under 4765, you have an absolute right, because there was not a quorum or more on the committee, you have an absolute right to appeal to the full board. Those two board members in a bad and by the way, the law doesn't require this. The law does not require them to sit out. Okay? In bad HOAs, those two board members will not sit out. They will involve themselves in that meeting and sway the other board members, or try to, okay? That's unfair, and that does happen a lot. That's realistic, and there's nothing in the law. This is where there's a hole in the law, I think. There's nothing in the law that says, well, they have to recuse themselves. It's not really, for legal purposes, a conflict of interest, although it is, because you have the same people that already denied you listening to your appeal. You would think that an appeal would be different people. And that's really sort of, if we use our fairness meter, that's true. But unfortunately, the law just doesn't cover that. Good HOAs, and we've seen this a lot, will have an internal rule that says the two or one director that might be on that committee will sit out of the appeal to the board as a whole. They'll be there, they'll be present, but they won't
abstain from voting, participation,
or from engaging. Or they'll say, look, we want to hear from that board member, so we're gonna let them participate in the discussion, but they aren't gonna vote. It'll be one of the two. It'll either be they can't vote or can't participate. That's more rare. Good HOAs most of the time will allow that director to explain, here's why the committee denied the application, even though it should be in some sort of written report. But even if it's not, here's why it was denied. Okay, great. And then that board member might even be present during the internal discussion for the vote, right? But they won't let him vote, or her, okay? That's what good HOAs do. Bad HOAs say, well, it's not required and we don't care.
And one quick addition, although not per se required, good HOAs will also consider certain board members who may have similar issues themselves. For instance, let's say you're applying for a fence and your fence was denied, fence replacement. Yet they have some kind of a fence that would give the appearance of either selective application or enforcement. So they will exclude that director from deliberations or a vote on your application or your appeal. Or in cases where you have a personal dispute or conflict, they will basically exclude that director because you've asked for it.
The most important thing to remember here is good HOA. So good HOAs try to avoid this inherent loophole, this issue in the law, by structuring their architectural committees with non-directors. They might put one director, sometimes two, because 1 and 2 are never going to be a quorum. I mean, I guess there is such.
2 could be, theoretically.
2 could be,
yeah.
If there's a 3-member board, but that would be a very small HOA that might not even have an architectural committee. In other words, good HOAs will try to avoid this loophole and maximize transparency because they're good HOAs by populating the committee with non-board members or making sure it's less than a quorum, 1 or 2, for example. In the numbers we've been using, 1 or 2. Bad HOAs that have architectural committees might, at a minimum, put a quorum there or even stock the entire membership of the committee with board members. They do that on purpose because they do want to blur those lines. Because in those cases, those appeals become meaningless. Yes, we offer an appeal. Sure, we'll give you that. And it's the same people that denied it. So how valuable is that appeal? It's worthless. If it's the exact same people, you might as well not bother because it's not going to change their mind. So just keep that in mind. It's just kind of a hole in the law, but there is some nuance there. Now, we haven't talked about this, Sam. How are architectural committees crafted or appointed? Okay, they don't create themselves. No. So obviously, we're assuming we learned before that they have to be the HOA either has to mandate their existence or empower the board to form them at any time.
Correct.
We're assuming that's the case. Okay, so the first question is. Once we've established governing documents have permitted the existence of this committee or mandated, whatever the case is, it's, okay, who gets on this committee? Who gets on the committee?
If it's required, it oftentimes is accompanied by how it's supposed to be structured, number of members, how they're supposed to be constituted. So you clearly have a blueprint and mandate from your governing documents. If it's not required,
And by the way, that's a minimum, and that's a rarity.
Correct.
When it's completely required.
in the majority of cases where it's not required or mandatory, but it's authorized for the board to designate, then they have discretion to appoint.
Completely.
So they essentially would do it essentially by way of a rule creation
Right.
or adopting guidelines to create this committee.
Right. They can say, we, the board, have decided that our architectural committee should consist of 7 people, and 2 of them are going to be directors.
Mm-hmm.
We will appoint those directors as we see fit, and we will appoint a mix of homeowners. We'll put the manager on there maybe, and we'll put an architect on there, and then we'll put 4 members at large. Whatever it is, they can appoint who they want, and and if they don't like the rules that they, maybe 5 years ago, prior board established a certain set of rules.
Yep.
They don't want 7 people anymore. They can pass a new rule, and they have to, as long as they abide by 4360 and the 28-day rule. We have.
Yep.
I'll put one more link in our show notes or in our description. One more link to the episode we did on the
Rule adoption.
rule adoption.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
but as long as the board changes the rule, they can change it to whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's easy. Those are the easy things. Okay, and let's say, and they don't have to have a rule change to get rid of somebody.
No,
Because they're going to establish a set of rules that says, all right, here's how we'll get rid of people if we want to. The board will get together and vote, and if a majority of us decide you're out, you're out. Once that is set in place, if they don't like the conduct or the behavior of a committee member, or the committee member's been skipping committee meetings, it just hasn't been showing up, they can just send they can get together and meet at an open meeting, put it on the agenda, have a 2-minute discussion saying, you know what, we're not happy with, John Smith or Mary Smith. They need to be removed. Let's replace John and Mary with this person. Done. Over.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's all it takes.
The better HOAs, in my view, will have a policy for that as well, so that there's clarity, right? People know what they're getting into, and they'll say, here's a conduct, here's the requirements, here's the proper decorum for directors, officers, and even committee members.
Right. Now, let me give you the very rare scenario that works differently from the 2 scenarios we just painted. Okay? And that is that the governing documents not only require an architectural committee, but require that the members of that committee be elected by the membership. Mm-hmm. If the governing documents say that, then the board has no authority to select a committee member. You got to go by the governing documents, and the governing documents are allowed to mandate that. I think I have seen that 2 or 3 times in my entire career.
I've seen it a few times.
Older
Yeah.
CC&Rs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Older CC&Rs. I certainly can tell you I haven't seen it in more than a decade.
It's rare. Yeah.
Okay. But it's out there. Okay. It's expensive. It's time consuming because it takes a lot. Think about all the notice requirements that go into open elections, right? It's to me, it's dumb. What you'll see that in, though, is small HOAs that have a committee for some reason. They will be more apt to be the ones that'll do that. Mm-hmm. Very small, like under 10. You might see that. Okay, but then why have a committee? But I'm not there to answer why.
For some reason, I vaguely recall seeing those, encountering those with the really affluent, high-end communities that are smaller, but multi-million-dollar homes. And for some reason, I don't know if it's a function of the members wanting to feel important or
I never noticed that connection.
The few times I just vaguely recall that there appeared to be a nexus there.
Okay. Well, that kind of leads us into what I think an obvious statement is that membership or architectural committees can vary in terms of size. You can have a committee of 3, you can have a committee of 5, and you can have a committee of 11 or 12 or 20. Now, I don't think I've ever seen that, but there's nothing stopping it. An HOA can establish their own rules as to how large the committees must be, and the Davis-Sterling Act doesn't say committees can be no more than this many members and no fewer than this many. It's completely open. So some really large HOAs might have more than one. Some might have ones with larger, might have 9, 8, 7, 10, 12, usually not an even number, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's up to each individual HOA and their board as to how large their committees are going to be. Okay. But I think the typical size is 3 to 5.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay.
And there are practical difficulties the more you go up in numbers. People arguing and fighting. Different things happen with these committees.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now let's go over bad HOA tactics when it comes to architectural committees. So there's a list of things that bad HOAs tend to do. They don't do all of these. Some do some do others. And there might be some out there that do all of these. But these are some of the tactics that come up most common with bad HOAs, not good ones. Okay? So good HOAs, their architecture committees operate normally. They review the applications. They decide based on governing documents and prevailing law, and they issue written decisions within a reasonable period of time, and they abide by 4765, and they do what they're supposed to do, and you never hear anything else. That's what's supposed to happen. That's great. Bad HOAs don't do that. Okay? Bad HOAs have architectural committees that will operate outside the confines of their own governing documents or the law or both. Okay? And that we see with those bad HOAs, we see certain patterns emerge. Okay? Here's an example. Here's a common one. Bad HOAs will often have architectural committee, even though the governing documents don't authorize the establishment of that committee or any committee. Okay? In other words, governing documents don't even authorize the board to form committees, and yet, lo and behold, there's a committee. Can't do that. But doesn't stop a bad HOA. They do it anyway. Okay? A committee member are never formally appointed by the board. Somebody just kind of appears on the committee. And there was never actually a decision at a board meeting as reflected in the minutes. And by the way, to do it right, it could literally be at an open board meeting where this is agendized, right? We want to formulate a architecture committee. We're looking for volunteers at the next meeting. So any homeowners out there wish to volunteer? I do. They do a quick vote. You're on. That's all it would take. But they skip that. They just kind of whoop. One director maybe goes to a neighbor and goes, yeah, you want to be on the committee? Great, you're on. Can't do that.
No.
Do you have another one?
Give
me something with a management company.
I believe I've seen management companies kind of substituting their own, not even deliberation, but they kind of almost sua sponte, spontaneously issue a rejection denial of an application received.
Before it even gets to a committee. I've seen that.
And
more commonly, I've seen usually if a manager is attending a committee meeting, it's often to take minutes. And then they inject themselves into the conversation, even though they're not members of the committee. They inject themselves in the substance of the conversation. Not, hey, Section 2.06 requires this and that, and this. These plans aren't abiding by that. And to remind the board, no, that's different.
That's common.
Right. That's more common than where the management company just usurps the board authority and says denied.
That's more extreme, yes.
That's very extreme, very rare. But more common is that a manager that's there to take minutes asserts themselves or usurps the position of a committee member or inserts themselves into the discussion substantively. That's not allowed.
Correct.
Okay? Committee denies applications based on vague, unwritten, or unreasonable preferences in violation of 4765.
That's very,
Did I say 4765?
4765.
Yeah.
That's very common.
I sometimes say 4675. I don't mean to. I mean to say 4765.
I think we know, right.
Okay. That's illegal.
It is. Yeah.
Can't do that. Okay. So another example is you have a committee made up of a majority or quorum or more of directors, and they've disregarded one or more aspects of the Open Meeting Act. So one of the things we talked about before. In this case, let's say they don't take any minutes. They deny your application, but there's nothing in the minutes as to who voted what or the nature of the discussion. So that's a violation.
Yeah.
Can't do that. Think about it this way. Bad HOAs are bad HOAs because they don't want transparency. So anything that would encourage transparency, they tend not to do. It's an easy way to tell the difference between the two. Okay?
And this applies to them too in a less nefarious fashion. They're clumsy, incompetent, and
negligent,
and they cut corners, and they don't apply the standards, if any, consistently. And we see that all the time.
Or they operate outside of the written standards or guidelines or requirements.
Right.
Okay? They deny a balcony even though the balcony comports with the requirements set forth in the rules, regulations, and in the governing document, in the CC&Rs. Nah. Or they engage in selective enforcement. Any of the other things we talk about in all the other episodes we ever had.
Right.
Okay? That's what we're talking about. Now, who can change architectural guidelines, Sam?
The board can.
Yeah.
They can do it by rule adoption. We alluded to that earlier under 4360, and subject to the 28-day comment period.
Exactly.
The membership doesn't vote on it, just to be clear.
No.
But they do have an opportunity to comment, and oftentimes we see that even if the comments are less than stellar, the board still has discretion to proceed and adopt.
The board has discretion. All that's required in the law on a rule change is that that the homeowners get a 28-day written notice period to comment, at which point there's a meeting. And at that meeting, usually it's going to be a longer homeowner forum. Homeowners will often stand up, explain why they like or don't like the rule. And you could it could be obvious that the vast majority of the homeowners absolutely despise this rule. The directors have a right to say, okay, we heard you. We love the rule. Done. And they vote. They don't have to listen to the homeowners. It's not a democratic situation. It is a comment period. As long as they allow the proper length of the comment period, 28 days, and the homeowners get a chance to say their say, they can disregard every single homeowner and do what they want anyway. Homeowners have a remedy. We're not going to go into it. We talked about that in the episode we did on rules and rule adoption. The important thing is that the board can change the rules, propose new ones anytime they want, as long as they follow 4360. That's it.
Yep.
Okay? Now, what they can't do is, amongst themselves at a board meeting, say, from now on, we need to start doing this at these committee meetings. Hey, you guys start doing this at the committee. You can't do that. They can't create new rules without going through that process.
And that really happens.
It does happen.
Yeah.
Because and it often happens on innocuous things that don't matter, so it doesn't get challenged. Like, oh, geez, we forgot to require them to do this. Hey, guys, you need to do this. Yeah. Technically, nobody might have a problem with that, but you're doing it wrong. You got to follow the rule-making authority, which means you got to follow that 28-day comment period.
That's right. Yep.
It's got to be done properly. But it's often ignored. Often. And a lot of the time it's ignored. It doesn't matter, so it never ends up on our plate.
Yeah.
Or we would tell the homeowner, you're technically correct, but do you have a problem with this rule? No, I actually agree with it. Well, then, let's not. You know what I mean?
No harm,
Don't
no
waste
foul.
your money. No harm, no foul.
Yeah.
But it's still wrong, technically, okay? But then it can be about things that do matter. And that's when a homeowner will very much dispute that and say, no, that's not going to be right, okay? For example, and this would be, you could have a architecture committee review somebody's application to build a pergola, and the pergola conforms to the paint color standards. The plans that are submitted conform to all the written standards for pergolas. And the HOA goes, we decided that we have too many of that color. We need to start having every other house have a different color so we have some variation. Or the color needs to match the house. If that's not one of the rules, they can't do that unless they do the rule change and require that. Yeah. The committee can't just change rules.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. And the board can't say, hey, committee, do that. Can't do that. Okay? Architectural committees exist for a good reason. In HOAs that have the right to select them and the power to select them or that are obligated to select them, their purpose is to assess applications within the confines of the law and the governing documents and to issue decisions in conformity with the law and all the notice rights and the things that are set up in the Davis-Sterling Act regarding denial, et cetera. They exist for that reason. They exist basically as to help the board and not as a substitute for the board by any means, but to help the board, okay? And they're, to the extent that an HOA has an architectural committee that is following the law and following the rules set forth in the governing documents, nobody has a problem with that, okay? It's when they run afoul of that, when they violate your rights, that it becomes a problem. architectural committees do serve an important purpose, especially in larger communities where the board needs that help, okay? Needs the guidance or needs somebody else to be able to take stuff off their plate. And
streamlines it for the membership so things move along faster.
And streamlines for the membership so that you're not waiting an unreasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
If you like this episode, please hit the like button. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel, HOA Hell. If you'd like to leave a comment or ask a question, please do so. We love reading those. Until next time.